be part of something. This is me when I slightly changed my hair a little bit, but again, I was going through lots of different phases, and it was always important to me to kind of express myself with these different clothes. At the same time as doing this, I was working with my dad's print shop. So this is a picture of his Heidelberg. So all the money that I was earning from my dad in his workshop was probably getting spent on clothes, concerts, and all the other things that teenagers spend their money on. But I guess it gives a little bit of a story as to why I perhaps chose to do books. Because printed matter has always been a really, really important part of my life. And it's something I've grown up with every day. I think print, despite the digital revolution, print's actually had a really, really big resurgence recently. I think it continues to be a really important part of spreading information, knowledge and culture. This is just an aside. We'll skip through that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the kind of influences that led me to do a book which is about a collaborative project, really. So this is a really, really important book by an anthropologist called Ted Polymus, actually, who did an exhibition and book at the Victoria and Albert Museum, and it's 20 years since this book. And what this book was really a kind of exploration of the different modern tribes of Britain. And the whole world, really. So you have everything, he kind of mapped out a cultural history. So you have everything from like psychedelics, mods, hippies, rockabillys, teddy boys. So in a way, this is kind of interesting and relevant today because I think the world that we're living in now, where ethnic groups, there's been so many changes in a global world, who knows what will happen, and these kind of new formations of groups are really relevant. This is an interesting photographer that's been a big influence to me. He's called Gavin Watson. And what I liked about his photos was they were very much, he was documenting his friends at the time. And what I noticed in these photos was an intimacy that he got from him being very close with his subjects. And I've seen a lot, I'm a photographer and I also work with young people in the community settings. So I noticed, rather than a typical anthropological approach, they came from the inside. So there was a certain energy and spontaneity to these photos that I found really, really interesting. And this is kind of something that I extend in my personal photographic work. This is another of his photos. I like the naturalness, the energy, and that feeling of getting inside a moment of someone else's life. This is a photographer called Liz Johnson-Arter, who she was actually German, but she was a mixed parentage. She came to the UK and she was documenting a lot of the Caribbean culture of the time. And this is, again, it's looking so much at how style and how these little details like clips, and you can see that in different kinds of like ethnic and tribal cultures and how people express their identity through these. She did a lot of work with MIA, the singer, so she did a lot of work documenting her kind of archive, and she's an interesting and inspiring person to look at in terms of like a British Asian doing something that's sort of memorable to me. This was a really interesting book called Fruits that I saw on a trip to Japan, and what I noticed when I was in Japan was the great kind of emphasis that the youth had on style and on differentiating themselves and on the fashion. And this is a book, like you probably saw this when I was maybe 18 or something, and I thought I'd love to do a book like that one day. So it's been a kind of influence on me. This is an interesting project. It's called Exactitudes, and these are two artists, and they go to different cities and they look at the different kind of typologies of people. And again, this is a sort of like a visual anthropology project. So it's looking at, you see all these people, and they just happen to dress like this. They haven't been asked to dress like this, but they happen to dress like this. It's just mapping out human behaviour and how that is expressed as well. This is an artist who is called Jeremy Deller, and I like his projects because they kind of really explore this kind of cultural identity and social history. And Jeremy Deller did something where he got a brass band, a northern brass band, which is a big tradition in the north, and he got them to play an acid house song. I don't know if you know acid house, but it's sort of 80s electronic music. So what he was doing here was he was kind of mapping out the social history and the connection between brass bands and acid house music, and how, say things, for example, like the miners' strike, the criminal justice bill, the changes in capitalism, and how they connected with cultural stuff. So all my work is really about this kind of cultural mapping and looking at how cultural expressions reflect the kind of social conditions. And just lastly, this is an artist called Stephen Gill who looks at, he did a big project where he gave everyone in the post office a camera and he asked them to document their environment. So really it's about getting inside people's worlds and seeing what they're presenting rather than somebody going in from the outside. And that's kind of like the ethos behind the What We Wore project. So I'll briefly talk you through the book and how the book came about. Oh, hang on. So I don't know if many of you have like social media and have heard of a site called Flickr, which is like an image sharing website. So basically, I kind of noticed that I'd seen a lot of new photos of youth cultures that I'd not seen before that were being shared on Flickr. And this is a kind of public sharing system, so it was all about people sharing their images and scanning and archiving, much as we'll probably have done. I've often seen groups of like, from the past, people uploading stuff now. So basically, I started a group then called What We Wore, and it was actually 6 years ago that I started this group. And then it was just very much a hobby. So it was just me collecting images and putting them together and looking at similarities and differences. And it was just something I did sort of, aside from my everyday work, which is as a photographer. And then a few years later, I began a website called ISYS. Unfortunately, it sounds a bit like ISIS, but it actually says, this is before ISIS, it actually stands for I Saw You Standing. So it's the idea of like to see somebody from a distance and what they're wearing says about them. And I think this is particularly important in adolescence because this is the time where we're drawing attention to our bodies and ourselves as opposed to when we become older and our kind of place is the domestic space. And this is one of the first images that was used as a What We Wore post. And this is actually an American image, an American girl. And alongside this was some text with her explaining this was like, taken, it was before her school prom or something like that. And it was called the Death Rock Days. So she was really into this music called Death Rock. And obviously you can see all that kind of conveyed there. So we ran, ISYS was a website project which I co-ran. And this is one of the first bits of What We Wore content. And so I guess the power of social media and the internet these days, you can really quickly build something up and build a really big following. So this was really popular. So we started putting these posts out on the internet and they'd get like 100 likes on Facebook. So I started to think, oh, maybe people like this What We Wore idea. It was quite important as well that with What We Wore, there was text with it that explained what was going on. And because for me it's about I think these days images sit a lot out of context, so it was about bringing out personal stories and finding out what was going on at the time. It's hard to explain that without the images, but you can see the book, you can see. And this is, I sort of thought, well, having done a lot of self-publishing, I thought I'll try and publish this myself. My dad's got a printer, so I thought, I'll give it a go. But I actually thought, well, this seems to be quite popular. Maybe it's got a larger audience. Maybe I could turn this into an exhibition or something bigger as well. I came across the book, an American book at the time, and this book is about youth culture in Boston, and it was a similar kind of ethos. It was collected and found images, and this had an official publisher, so I thought, maybe I should try and get a publisher. I was also thinking it's a very interesting time for a project like this because it really is, it's the end of the kind of print film era. So it really marks the end of the film era. I thought it's quite interesting to see the qualities in the photographs and the differences. This is an old Brownie camera, one of the earliest cameras. This is a Polaroid, I'm sure some of you might know. An APS camera, and I think it's, as well as a study of people's clothes, it's also a study of the mode of photography they used. So I thought that could be an interesting selling point as well for a potential exhibition. So fortunately at the time, a friend of mine was working at Prestel, who are a really renowned publisher, and she said, I'll help you take this as a pitch. So I was able, with her, to put together a pitch and approach them. And I had to look at all the kind of different things about it and why it was appealing. And pitches aren't something that I like doing, but I kind of thought, well, if I want to make this work and reach a really big audience, then it's really worth investing your time in this. And also, again, it goes back to the sort of networking thing. Having a contact there was really, really beneficial to get. Because I think it feels like a lot of people want books these days, and I think it is possible to publish your own book, but to get an actual publisher is more difficult, and there's not a huge amount of money in it either. So Prestel has done some really, really interesting books by people who I really respect in a similar field. So when they said they wanted to publish it, I was obviously delighted. I then realised that I had quite a lot of work to go with gathering the material for the book. So it wasn't just about contacting professional journalists and photographers, it was contacting everyday people and getting material from them. I also wanted to include people with like cultural profile who were interesting, and I thought that would add to the selling point of the book, and also it would just be really, really nice to have them in there. So I built and designed this website to gather the material. So in a way, it's kind of like it was meant to be self-generating. So, and the archive is actually still open. So if people have images of their style, of their youth style, they can upload the images to the website. So I wanted to make it as simple as possible for people to upload content. I guess you'd call it a crowdsourced project. So it's really about the people making the project and me as the catalyst for the project. We also did events at the Tate Britain, the Victorian Albert, the Ace Hotel, and other shops where people could bring in their images. So this kind of social dimension was really, really important to the project. And this is a flyer from one. So it was quite nice. And I guess maybe I was inspired in some way by the work that you do here at the Goodsey with bringing people together, also the publication and all these things. And I've sort of seen that as I've been growing up as well. As you all know, social media is so important. This is the Instagram for What We Wore. So this was again about building up the community around any project. I guess this project is really, really about style and photography, but I think this applies to any kind of business or enterprise or any kind of venture that you're taking on that relates to communication. And I think it's a really, really important currency these days. We also did partnerships with Dazed and Confused magazine. They did a really interesting series of documentaries called Music Nation, which was on looking at how music, different eras of music, and this is one about the UK garage scene, and that was a big way to help build an audience. So it's about building those partnerships with bigger organisations than yourself. And I'll really quickly talk you through the chapters. So the book is split into 5 chapters, and the first one is home. So these are all images from home. So what was really interesting for me was to see, say for example with an image like this, you don't just see his looks, but you see the backdrop and the kind of social history that you see with that. So when I got this photo, I was just really delighted because I just thought, when do you see a photo like that? You only see that when you access someone's personal album. And the memories and the stories that come with this it's nice to put them out into the world and for other people to see them and share them, be part of them. I also really enjoyed the process of pairing images together. This is an image from the mid-90s and this is an image from the mid-80s, but obviously they're both shot in a kitchen. So, by seeing the background here, you see other things than the clothes. This is an interesting story as the girl, she had recently come from, I think, Russia or something like that, and she said she sent this picture to her parents to scare them. And they said, "You look fantastic, darling. It's great that you're having such a wonderful time in London." So I thought that was quite funny. And I think, these images are quite interesting because you can see the cycle of fashion and how some of these things has got back into fashion now. This is from a chapter called On the Street. So it's looking at street fashion and the different role. This is someone called Don Letts, who's a big DJ and promoter and filmmaker who kindly contributed some work. This is flares, which are coming back into fashion again, I'm told. Also had a chapter called Shopping, which looked at kind of like shops, independent boutiques, and this is a contributor called Wale Adeyemi, who's actually got an OBE, who runs a label called B-Side. So these people, they might not look familiar, but they actually, some of them are in the fashion industry, are quite high profile, so to get pictures of them in their formative years was a real selling point for the book. This is from a chapter called Away Days, which looks at the kind of like out-of-town trips. And this is from a friend of mine on holiday, I think in like Ibiza or somewhere like that. And it just looks at that idea of these rituals, these sort of teenage rituals. And although these are very contemporary pictures, they translate into lots of different societies. I think that's really interesting, if you look at it more broadly. This is an interesting one actually. It's from a guy called Riaz Khan, who, I don't know if many of you will have heard of the casual movement, that's like a football movement, but he was actually an Asian casual. So what he talks about in his story is, the casual movement is actually a movement which is associated with violence and sometimes racism, but his story was actually, it wasn't about that, it was about the camaraderie aspect of it, and it was interesting to show a slightly different story to the stereotypical story and get a different understanding of someone's personal perspective. But I guess, you know, the pictures kind of, they sort of speak for themselves, but there's lots of text that goes with them, so I won't give you all the details. I'm sure you can have a look at the book to see. Yeah, so basically, my plans for the book next, I'll talk a little bit, is I hope to do an exhibition. I also want to talk about, like, one of the big challenges for me was getting really, really organised. So I'm kind of organised, but I'm not the most organised person in the world. So this is just a picture of my folders, what my folders look like. It's a bit of a mess. And then it was a very, very long process to get to the point where the book was complete. It took 2 years, but this was among other things. I was really lucky to have someone to work with, my friend Eve, who was at Prestel. She worked with me closely on the research. And then when the book came out, it was actually really, really well received. So it had press in ID magazine, The Observer, The Independent, The Guardian. So I think because of this, you know, people sort of know about it. And I think that press was a really, really important part of the process. I think this is a Vice magazine, Esquire magazine. So yeah, I mean, it was a very, very long project, but it was really nice to get that recognition in the press. And finally, to see it on the shelves. So this is it on Amazon, and this is it in Urban Outfitters. And I do actually have some copies here today, which you can look at, and you can also buy here. So yeah, any good book wouldn't be a book without a good party. So we also had a launch party for the book. So I'm just going to briefly say, talk about my learnings on the project. I guess the first thing would be, you can't do anything alone. Working with people is really, really crucial, and working with people that you get on with. I was really lucky to work with Eve at the publishers, and she helped me get the deal, and she also helped me loads with the research. So I think, you know, you may think you can handle everything alone, but the reality is you can't, and you need support, and it's relationships and things like that. The second is patience. Any project, patience is important, and I can be quite impatient sometimes, but I've had to learn to be patient and to understand that things, you reap the rewards eventually. I guess, again, this is similar because this is more targeted at students, but again, it's something that, you know, parents can feed back to children. I guess you're constantly striving. I guess lots of young people today want to do things in the creative industries, and it is difficult. And I think it's probably something that like any career, I think the creative industry is particularly tough, but there are opportunities there. And I think it gets easier, but the work doesn't end. It's like you continually, in any career, you're continually having to push and drive things forward. Also, you have to get good at the bits that you don't necessarily enjoy, and push yourself. No one really wants to do that, but I think you're not going to get to that level where you make things happen unless you're willing to do that. What a lot of people are asking me at the moment is, what next? What are you going to do next? The first thing I'd say is try and just enjoy your achievements before you rush into doing further things. I think for me that's quite important. I kind of just want to take stock a little bit on what I've done, and this has been a very, very long-term project for me. And I think it's really important to plan and be strategic about what your next steps are. And the final thing is, be true to who you are and what you want to do with your work and your creative work. Integrity is really important to me, and sometimes that means taking a long way around, but I think it's worth it in the end. But yeah, that's about it. These are my social media tags, handles. So.
Thank you, Ms. Manandhar, for the inspiration and talk about your influences. Any question, please?
Hi, congratulations, Nina, for those last 20 minutes when you showed us photos and photos and photos. I wish all the doctors and engineers in this room could do that when they present. Just with photos, you said everything you wanted to say, right? And congratulations for your books. Two of your books, right? What I wanted to ask you is, a book like this, what we wore, what do you value? I mean, it could have a lot of different influences in the future, and for the community, it could have historical value, it could have an anthropological value, cultural value, arts value, and so on. What do you value the most for a book like this, that you've produced? What do you think is the most important thing about this book as an influence to the community?
When you say the community, you just mean people in general?
The British community, the British population as a whole, maybe?
I think what's interesting is it tells a different story away from the stereotype. So it's about that it's about changing people's perceptions of things. Do you know what I mean? So it's breaking those things down and telling things from people's own point of view as opposed to kind of from top down. Like changing how history is written. And I think it's different now with the internet, and with people have much more power to tell their own stories. But it hasn't been like that forever.
What will it actually take us to influence you to have a book on our community? That's
a good question. That's exactly what I wanted to ask.
I guess it's just finding the right idea, isn't it? But also, I don't necessarily think community should. It's about, for me, what's exciting is bringing different communities together. So any project that I'd be drawn to would be something like that, really.
Yeah, I'm not telling you haven't, because I was there on her first books exhibition. It was a release launch, right?
Yeah.
Launch of the first book, and she actually had the Lucky dance in the hall, in the stage, and it was brilliant. Thank you so much.
Oh no.
Can you give an introduction as well? You want to ask a question, yeah?
Yes.
Can you give an introduction as well, please?
Okay, my name is Manandhar. I'm an anthropologist from SOAS, and thank you for your presentation. And it's very fascinating project, especially I like the website project. That side is particular, very stimulating. I was wondering, have you had also the opportunity to conduct some ethnographic people within a particular community in order to find out some internal differentiation inside the trend, inside the culture? I mean, inside a specific trend, for example, any differentiations in terms of gender, ethnic origin, or class distinction and taste, in order to find out an internal articulation of a particular attention trend.
Yeah, I guess if you look at a lot, in a weird way, it's kind of like a lot of the, if you read the stories that come with it, you see the why it's sort of, there's a word for it, so it's not about, it's not trying to kind of like collect data or anything like that. It's really about trying to sort of show a flavour of life. So it's more ethnographic, I guess. And I haven't studied ethnography or anthropology as a fine art, so it doesn't really sit in one discipline. But kind of for me, what is really nice is the little details that come out, which make it feel like you're having a conversation with somebody. Like say when you have a conversation with somebody for hours, and you hear a little detail, and that is like, wow, like, that's exciting. So it kind of brings to life that history. So you know, I think it has lots of value as an archive, and I'd love for it to develop as a public archive or a photographic archive. But yeah, I'm a little bit beyond, I'm not there yet. So.
I think we have one question to ask. Dr. Sothikan has asked one question.
It's a sort of general question and maybe much appropriate for you because you say that you are a photographer and an artist. And there's a kind of big chunk of people who say that photography is not an art. So how do you interpret, because you being, you know both
yeah, I think like I think photography is an art. I think there's so much stuff like how do you define art? Some people, it's all like the context it's put in. You know, some people are very creative and artistic with their cooking. You know, that's artistic. I mean, I think photography, there's lots of different disciplines in photography. I don't mind not being called an artist. I'm happy to be called a photographer. But I think that for me, the best photographers are the people that capture something that really, you know, just, I mean, everyone can take photos these days. It's about, you know, the same way that everyone can draw, and it's really about kind of people expressing themselves. But there's just certain ones that really stand out. You know, like capturing something about humans and life, and you know, that's really sort of strong for me. I think that the artist definition doesn't matter that much, but I think I'm personally interested in art which has got the power to do something which is socially transformative. But that's not my definition of what good art is. That's just my personal taste. So, you know, I'm done. I obviously really support you. Then with that, wonderful form, and honestly, I don't know what this place is. It's on the bar.
I was just talking about Sanchetan asked the question what photography is a form of art. See, I've been in photography because of the family. My brother was a professional photographer in Nepal, and they obviously got into photography at a tender age in 1996 when we went to Nepal. My brother already backed up his professional photography career. But what got me was last year she was invited to Senegal by a charity company to take photographs of the youth in Senegal in their bicentennial year to project an image of the youth. And the photos I saw that she took and was put all over the poster hoardings in Senegal, when I looked at it, I thought the youth and their image is projected, which gives obviously the country a new feeling that there is youth that they have to look up to and do something for. So the photography does project an idea or the image depending on how the photographer portrays it. And I thought that those pictures she hasn't shown, but really projected the image of the youth. And it gave credence to the bicentennial, which she would probably love to say. Yeah.